Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Waking Up with Neil Oliver, where we have conversations with insightful people about the condition in which we find ourselves or have found ourselves in during the course of the last 2 or 3 years. My guest today, Eva Vlaardingerbroek. Eva has been a student of law, a student of philosophy, more recently involved in politics, and right this moment, Eva is a very prominent and forthright commentator on where we are, and she has her own ideas about how we've got here, and definitely ideas about how we get to a better place. So, with no more ado, welcome, Eva, and thanks for making time for me today.
Hi, Neil. Thank you for that very kind introduction.
We'll just get straight into it because there's so much to talk about. I have a theory that no one has actually been changed by the events of the last few years. I think individuals' true natures have simply been revealed or even exposed. I think we're seeing people for who they really are, and it's been a fascinating, revelatory time, I would say. That said, people's lives have certainly been changed. Plans, ambitions, objectives, and so on. With that in mind, if the last 2 or 3 years had been different, where would you rather have been, and what might you have imagined yourself doing in that parallel universe?
Oh, well, there are a lot of easy things, that I could say now. Like, I would have preferred to live my life the way that it was, being able to spend time with friends and family, going to museums that I was barred from, going to concerts that I wanted to go to. But actually, when I really truly think about it, I so deeply agree with you that I think this time period has not, shown us that people are ultimately very different, but that people are really who they are and what that says about human nature. So maybe I wouldn't want to miss it, because I've come to that conclusion myself much more as well, that there is really evil and good in humans, in us ourselves. And that is something that now has been really shown to us in an unprecedented way, almost on an unprecedented scale. And that is a revelation to me that I don't want to lose, because it has given me a lot of insight, I feel like, in the political fight that we're fighting and the world that we live in. Because I've been in political commentary and on the conservative side of politics and things for some years now. But, I feel like I've been accustomed, or I've gotten accustomed technically, to sort of social exclusion, if you can say that, where friends leave you because they don't agree with your opinions, or you're being canceled in the media and things like that. But never in the way that we've endured in the past 2 years, where it became a real stripping of your freedom, of your liberty to go and stand wherever you want to. And a government that says, I can lie over and over and over again and tell people things. And even though the truth is so blatantly out there that none of this is what I'm saying makes any sense, citizens, people, ordinary people will still follow everything that I do and are willing to treat you as a second-class citizen. And I think that revelation that there is good and evil in everyone, and that it can come to the forefront, sadly, very quickly in people's minds when they're told lies, or, just out of convenience to them, is something that I think is very insightful. And I don't really want to lose that, that knowledge.
It's interesting. People have said to me, do you wish it hadn't happened, i.e. the process of the last few years? And I don't. I have a profound sense that I would rather know now. Yeah. I would rather be in the state of what I regard my fresh understanding of the reality around me. You mentioned your politics, obviously, and that's clearly very important to you. You're conservative. It's always been an unfashionable stance to take, especially for younger generations. When did you, and why did you identify with the conservative end of the spectrum?
That took a while. So I think for me, when I started university, basically, already in high school, I could tell that I had some opinions that my history teacher, for example, would deem to be, that's quite right-wing, That was definitely something that I found out rather quickly, that people thought that my opinions on immigration, for example, or on Islam were deemed very right-wing. And it only, when I got to university, I remember there was a very specific lecture that I was following at the time for law. And they were talking, or the professor was talking about a dichotomy, at least that's how he presented it, between cultural relativism and universalism. And I remember listening to that, and he was saying, like, either you are a cultural relativist, someone who, you know, who says, oh, all cultures are equal, none is better than the other, which in all honesty usually translates into Western culture is worse than everything else. And universalism saying, oh, there are values that are universal to everybody, you know, and that's how it is. And I remember deeply disagreeing with that and thinking, no, I don't agree. I don't think it is either universalism or cultural relativism. I think those are the different sides of the same coin. I think that there are fundamental truths, yes, absolutely, like what we just talked about, the true, the good, and the beautiful, but that they can come to very different cultures, and that you can say, no, I appreciate the values of my culture or of this religion more, and I think that they are superior because they reflect the truth more. And that stance sort of landed me into the world, basically, of conservative thinkers. And only through other people who said, oh, if that's what you think, or if that's what you feel, then maybe you should come with me to this club or come with me to that group of people. That's how I kind of rolled into the conservative movement in the Netherlands, which really isn't any really big movement at all. But I think that's where I started to realize that there wasn't just, you know, oh, it's right wing and left wing, but there's also something like the idea that there is a truth, you know, that there is beauty and that there is something that is truly inherently good.
Yeah, I've been very distressed, frankly, for years, and certainly in recent years, about this idea of my truth, which I just disregard entirely. There's truth and there's falsehood. There's truth and there's lies, and I absolutely see it as part of a kind of moral decline to encourage people to think that their own version of the truth is as valid as the truth.
Yes.
I think that's such a retrograde step in terms of, you know, the evolution of moral and philosophical thought. And it brings me to what's happening and what you've been so prominent talking about, what's happening to the farmers, what's happening to the Dutch farmers, what's going on there and elsewhere in the world strikes me as fundamentally anti-human.
Absolutely.
To go after farmers and that part of the population that provides the stuff of life,
yes,
is almost a textbook definition to me of anti-human thinking. So just talk to me a little bit about your passion in that area.
Of course, yes. So just to touch on what you said about the truth, I agree. There's nothing more annoying to me than, especially, you know, nowadays in American reality TV and stuff, you'll see people say, oh yeah, but that's your truth and I have my truth. Or people do something terrible and they post an apology video on YouTube and they're saying, my truth. Like that doesn't exist. You know, there's your objective, like your subjective idea, and there is the truth. And now I don't ever want to say that I know the truth fully 100%, because obviously I'm not perfect. No human is. And that's something that I think a lot of people have forgotten, actually, that, again, evil and good lives inside us. And we have a duty, I would say, to find the right path. But so this idea of, oh, truth doesn't exist as a concept, you know, it's just your idea, it's my idea, I think is deeply inherently what's wrong with our world. And when it comes to the farmers, this is, you know, although it's a very concrete example, something that, again, really follows from that idea of not understanding what the truth is. So we have a government that says there is a nitrogen crisis and we have to expropriate 3,000 farms unless they you know, voluntarily sell their farms to the state, because we need to solve this crisis. And you see now that there is a constant debate already for months where people go back and forth of, okay, but how can we fight this nitrogen crisis? Is what the government's doing, well, maybe forceful buyout goes a little too far, but maybe we can do this. And people get stuck in that narrative because, you know, this crisis is presented to us as a truth, as something that our government literally says is sacred. Those climate goals that they have to comply with are what they say sacred. And what I really have refused in this whole debate is stay in that narrative, because the premise on which it's built is false. You know, you can't go and debate people if they say, oh, no, but there is a nitrogen crisis and this needs to happen. It's a falsehood. It's a lie. It's a cover-up. It's a pretext. And that is something that I feel happens a lot nowadays, especially in the last 3 years, what we've seen with COVID, is that we are presented with a false narrative, with lies, and then forced to debate within that circle of lies. Whereas with this, I will tell you straight up, there is no nitrogen crisis. It doesn't exist except for on paper. And it's manufactured by people who have a very clear, I would say clear, agenda for us people. And it is an inhumane agenda. It is, you know, I feel like people often, I really would like to hear what you think about that. But I've always noticed that people find it a little bit scary to talk about intent. You know, it's like, oh, we'll listen to conservative ideas or we'll listen to right-wing thought. But the moment you suggest that the people in power actually have an evil agenda, people get really scared. They're like, oh no, that's conspiratorial. But I think it's the case in this one.
Yeah, it's what has another line that resonates for me all the time is it's never about what they say it's about. That's been a guiding light for me, a guiding principle. And I would say that COVID and the response to it was demonstrably not about public health. The war in Ukraine is sold to us about defending democracy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about defending democracy at all. And the climate crisis in inverted commas, is not about saving the planet. As far as I'm concerned, all three, COVID, war in Ukraine, and the debate around, it's not a debate, the diktats that are about climate are simply about control. It's just about establishing top-down centralised control over people's lives. You can mix finance and money and currency and central bank digital currencies and all the rest of it into that hellish potpourri as well. But that's where I think we are, and you're absolutely right that we're herded into this arena where you have to, in order to take part in the debate at all, you have to accept certain falsehoods, demonstrable falsehoods, as the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we're treated like cattle that they want to destroy. You know, they're starting with the farmers now, killing off the actual cattle, but they view us the exact same way, And that's the thing, you know, I worry about our future so much because of the lack of that ethical debate around this and the willingness to say, you know, even though I don't have their plans written in an email and I know exactly what they're talking about behind closed doors, that we judge people by their actions and say, if you willfully do this, you know, what our government has done, locking us up in our houses, despite all of the rational, you know, counter arguments that there were for lockdowns, our constitution, our bodily integrity, all of these things, they went against it. And if we can say, okay, if you keep on doing that over and over and over again, then we can assume that you have bad intentions for us. You know, then how are you going to take your enemy? If you don't take your enemies seriously enough, then how are you going to defeat them? How are you ever going to be able to stand up against them? So that I think the fact that that doesn't happen, or apart from maybe people like, you know, you and some others in this fight who courageously do dare to talk about good and evil, you know, if you're going to talk about minor details within the realm of what they accept for you, then before you know it, you are in a 15-minute city.
Where are you on the debate about a depopulation agenda? That there being a desire ultimately that there be fewer people in the future rather than more people in the future?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are a lot of people who've said it out in the open, you know, people like Bill Gates. There are a lot of people, very rich people, who have been saying that they think that the world needs fewer people rather than more. And then, you know, at first you can say, okay, well, that doesn't mean that they want to actively kill people. You know, this is where, again, the question of intent comes in. It's the question that people find the hardest to answer, the most scary to answer, for the fear of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, for the fear of sounding like a nut job, probably also for the human fear, I guess, of not wanting to believe that there are so many evil people in the world, which I think is a very scary conclusion, and one that we painfully, you know, had to draw from reality over the last 2 years, because we were at the very center of it. You know, people who were not vaccinated, like I told you, and you know, we didn't just face some social exclusion. We weren't just canceled or being treated badly by the left-wing media. No, it was like, okay, you can't go to university. You are going to lose your job. You can't go on that plane. And you could be standing there screaming in the desert, telling people, this doesn't make any sense. Do you think that this is right? We have a constitution. Nobody would listen. So, you know, we've been faced with it. So
and I know
Right.
we're going to get onto the topic of transhumanism as well, but where do you think this apparent antipathy towards the human species has come from?
Right. Yes. Sorry. The depopulation theory. I think at a certain point, if you see somebody doing things over and over again, and they say, "Oh, it's never my intention to do this," we have to just. First time you can trust them, right? The second time, you're like, "Ooh, you're doing this again, even though you said that wasn't your intention." Ooh, you're cutting the food supply. You're buying out farmers in a time of food scarcity already. Why would you do that? Why would you fearmonger? Why would you say that we need preventative missile strikes on Russia if you don't want nuclear war? I think at some point you have to start judging people by the way they act and not, what they say they intend for you, but just we do it in the legal system as well. Just when someone says, "I never meant to hurt you," but they hurt you, does that mean that they're not responsible for hurting you? No, you might be acting in a reckless manner. So you still could be, you still could be prosecuted, you still could be condemned, all of those things. So why wouldn't we hold those same values for the people who lead us, And at a certain point, things start to add up so much that to me, there's no question that there is a sinister agenda behind all of this. And I think that if we don't admit to that, then we can't fight it. You need to see evil for what it is.
I know that you're interested in talking about transhumanism, and it's something I've written about. It's something I think a great deal about. I've often worked from it. There's in 1990, Max Moore, philosopher, technocrat, said that transhumanism was a class of philosophies of life that seek the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life beyond its currently human form and human limitations by means of science and technology, guided by life-promoting principles and values. Now, I find that to be a very fluffy and positive definition of transhumanism. But is there just an antipathy or a dissatisfaction out there amongst a narrow elite with what it has meant to be human and alive?
Yeah, I think that transhuman is just a way for them to increase their own power. And it's deeply rooted, I can only feel, in an anti-human agenda, but also just a lack of true belief that there is something greater than you yourself. So we have a group of elites that really, truly, I think, see themselves as the highest power on this earth. And not just the highest power on earth, but just maybe the highest power, full stop. And that's the problem. So transhumanism, playing God, I think it's what it is. Interfering with the creation is basically playing with the devil. To me, there's no, and it can only go wrong. I do really think that, which is maybe the only solace to this anti-human agenda that they have. It's so anti-human, it's so unnatural that it from a faithful perspective, I can only think this has to go wrong at some point. But it can go really, really wrong for us before it ever goes wrong with the transhumanist agenda, before it ever goes wrong with, the agenda of control. And transhumanism is just a perfect way to do it, I suppose.
I don't understand why people, are a narrow band of people, are ready to move on from what it has been to be human into something else. When I don't feel, even after 200,000 years of Homo sapiens, I don't feel we've scratched the surface properly of what it is to be human. And I wonder where this narrow band of elites has come from that are ready to discard the human Mark I and replace it with something else. Where do you think that thinking comes from?
It's a common thing that every generation says about themselves, that they are better and wiser than the one before them and the one that comes after them, right? I think it was even Orwell who wrote that in one of his books. So maybe that's, in a sense, it's human nature for young generations or for new generations to think that we are, we're the ones that are going to do it differently. We're the ones that are going to do it better. Fukuyama being probably the top of that all, even quoting that, saying that it was the end of history in the 1990s. To an extent, I think that is normal for humans to think, we're going to do it radically different. But the problem is that in this generation, I think usually you could say that's false. Humans don't change that much. Human nature is pretty unchangeable. Look at us. We can't even make our beds in the morning. You know, it's hard to change a small little habit. But I think in our case, in the time that we live in, the difference is that the people in power have more possibilities to control people below them, so to say, than ever before. And that obviously started with the digital revolution. And now we're heading towards not just the digital revolution, but what the likes of Klaus Schwab call the fourth industrial revolution. So the merging of the digital, biological, and the physical world. And if that happens, and I think the people who are the most rich and powerful in this world are always looking for the next thing that they can do. You know, I can only imagine if you have so much money and so much power that things become really, really boring very quickly, especially if you don't believe in something greater than you. You know, so why wouldn't you try to interfere with the creation? Why wouldn't you try to play God? And I feel like that's something that people in power, you know, power corrupts, they always say, right, have always done. But we live in a particularly dangerous time, because now there are means and options in this globalized world that could imprison us, you know, forever, or at least for a really, really long time. The moment that we start to work not with QR codes on our phones to get into restaurants, but with QR codes in the forms of chips in your brain, you know, I think we've gone down a path that is very, very hard to return from.